It's all good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. This session is teaching and building moral economies of money. That's not where you thought you were. You can move now. Yeah, or you can stay. That's right. You are in the right place, whether you realize it or not. We have two moderators of this panel. I'm going to introduce Jakob and Rohan, and then I think Rohan's speaking first. So Jakob is the Feinig is the professor of sociology at the University of Binghamton SUNY. He interrogates the historically changing politics of money creation in British colonial America and the United States. And he's published showing how for centuries large groups understood money creation as a political practice and attempted to redesign the institutions that create money. And Rohan Gray is a professor of law at Willamette University. His research focuses on the legal design and regulation of money and finance, including digital fiat currency, as well as broader issues of law and political economy. And he teaches contracts, business organization, and securities regulation. So Rohan, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for having us all here in this sort of clown car of a panel that's managed to fit 6 people into one session. I'll try and speak for just long enough to justify my university paying for me to be here, and then I'll hand it over to people actually speaking on this panel. I'm very happy that this is on teaching and building moral economies of money. I think education is inherent to monetary justice, not just sort of the idea of popping a myth about how money works. We spend a lot of time in conferences like this sort of developing a counter-narrative to dominant orthodoxies, but the act of actually propagating that counter-narrative and eventually, ideally, building it into a hegemonic narrative is the work, not just having a direction, but actually getting to that direction. And I'll start with just a little quick quote from Hanna, which I like. Education is the point at which we decide whether we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it and by the same token save it from the ruin, which except for renewal, except for the coming of the new and young would be inevitable. And education too is where we decide whether we love our children enough not to expel them from our world and leave them to their own devices, nor to strike from their hands the chance of undertaking something new, something unforeseen by us, but to prepare them in advance for the task of renewing a common world. And I think the alternative to what we are looking at here as a vision of monetary education is what Jakob in his great book, which we'll hopefully talk about more later, describes as monetary silencing, right? The act of having people think that they are just users of a monetary system, they do not have a right to have opinions about how it should be designed, how it should work. And as someone that used to be a child advocate and early childhood educator, for me that's sort of best summed up in the image of Danny DeVito in the Matilda movie from the 90s where he says, you know, I'm big, you're small, I'm smart, you're dumb, I'm right, you're wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it. If that's not monetary silencing, I don't know what is. And I think all of us are here because we're trying to oppose that kind of world. The Jesuits used to say, you know, give your kid until they're 8 and you can have them afterwards because we'll have done all the damage. But I think for most of us, we're teaching in graduate school, which means we get 1 semester, maybe a couple of semesters with our students, and we have to work out how to provide a counter-narrative in a very short, time-intensive way, taking everything that we have learned, thousands and thousands of words and things, and boiling them down to a framework that is supposed to then empower these people to go out and have their own critically informed opinions. It's sort of like, how much rocket science can you teach in 1 semester to then have thoughts about NASA policy? It's a hard challenge, and I think this is a challenge not just of substance and vision, but of pedagogy, and of what we actually mean by designing educational spaces, whether that's a conference, a classroom, or an organization dedicated to education. I have some experience with this, working on issues like the $1 trillion coin, where I kind of ruthlessly leverage my experience with young kids to try and say, okay, how many of these ideas could we reduce to the level a 7-year-old could understand them? You know, friends of mine call it characteristic Australian bluntness, but I think it's important to kind of cut through the esoterica that might be useful for us to get tenure and things like that and work out a way to tell a story that is accessible from the ground floor upwards and could be integrated into a larger education system. So that's my little kind of framing of this panel. Without any further ado, we'll hand over to our first presenter. I believe it's Ben. Ben Wilson, who is an economics professor at SUNY Cortland. on money and the theory of the firm. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohan, and thank you everyone for being here, and to the conference organizers. We just hit this to bring up the slides. I'll get in full teacher mode here. Clicker. Hopefully I can figure out a way to use this beautiful chalkboard too. So Money and the Theory of the Firm is the title of a textbook chapter in an online open source textbook called Scarcity and Social Provisioning, which is the product of a bunch of UMKC graduates trying to figure out a way to create heterodox textbook spaces in our classrooms. So Theory of the Firm, that portion comes from the first class that I taught as an undergraduate instructor at SUNY Portland was our intermediate micro class, and it used to be titled Microeconomics Theory of the Firm. Has since moved to intermediate micro so that we can more easily streamline transfer and equivalencies within the SUNY system. So a little bit of chagrin because the theory of the firm really opened up this idea that a lot of space for thinking about this from a heterodox perspective, right? What is the theory of the firm about? And this textbook was passed on to me by the then department chair at SUNY Portland, and I've used it ever since because it's a really good framing of the critique later on. One of the comments that generally happens in that neoclassical text or other text is, as you make the transition from the consumer as the individual unit of analysis in consumer theory, you move to firm and production theory, you're making an ontological leap from the individual to this new unit, right? And they defend that by claiming that the firm offers a means of coordination that is extremely important if workers would had to operate on their own terms, right? And this sort of hand-waving defense of what the coordination that's going on in the firm does is it eliminates sort of what is actually going on, who's making the decisions within the firm, and how do those decisions impact the production process within the firm, right? So later on in the class, right, the neoclassical text will eventually make it to monopoly, oligopoly, and cartel. And in my classes, I started to build out social enterprise, complementary community currencies, NGOs, nonprofits, other firm structures that make very different decisions about how to coordinate their resources. And in doing so, I really wanted to add more about money and having a way of thinking about money as that coordinator, because the circuits of money capital came up in the last panel, right? And initiates production. So where is that end coming from? How are we making these decisions? Maybe that's the mobilizer and catalyst for the distribution and movement of these resources. So the first version of the chapter in the book that I produced was called Money and the Theory of the Firm. And it just gives really short, concise, the MMT story, right? But the medalist and the barter myths and classical political economy, the hierarchy of money, to think about those issues. And then a really short little segment at the end, thinking about local and complementary currencies. Cool. All right. The other arrows are fine. All right. So, one of the common ways of framing the sovereign currency issuer in MMT is as a monopoly issuer. And so we've heard a lot in the last couple of panels about how the monopoly issuer is either taking responsibility for how it's issuing the currency or outsourcing those decisions to finance. And as a monopoly issuer, in order to instruct this, I stole some teaching from UMKC and started to issue my own currency in classes as a monopoly issuer. And that the model is fairly simple, right? I say that there are things that I want to mobilize in terms of labor in the class through volunteer activities in the community. I'm going to pay you in the currency that I create. And at the end of the semester, you have to pay me in my currency to tax demonstrate, the basics of the tax circuit, money issuance, and all of these sorts of things. And I'm here to advocate that all of you, if you're teaching, should start doing this. Right? That becoming a money creator yourself is really a fascinating way to think about how we're going to mobilize these resources and what the jobs are under sort of an NIA program. What sort of firms and firm structures do we want to support? How do we begin to incorporate student decision making about those? So the easiest way to sort of introduce this is to allow the students to choose their volunteer activity, whatever nonprofit activity that they want to volunteer for through the course of the semester. That's open season, and that's the way I started. And in doing so, you get to meet lots of nonprofit organizations in your community, right? Because students will gravitate to a particular, handful. You start to build relationships with those folks, and through building those relationships, we can start thinking about larger asset structures that might be developing from those relationships, right? So rather than just being the one-off volunteer opportunity that a nonprofit can provide, we can start thinking about capacity building and what they could do if they could actually rely on a workforce in those spaces. So while we get this sort of view of what's going on in the economy when the monopoly issuer Congress isn't spending money in the appropriate places, and neither is finance, right? It's this huge sector where all of them are easily able to find meaningful and useful work in their community one semester after another. Why is this section of the economy not being invested in? It really opens up great conversations about the value of work, right? It's not just a job, it's not just a wage. Many of the students that engage in this do way more work and volunteering than they need to satisfy the tax obligation. The reflection piece that complements this often expresses gratitude and sense of worth and meaning, and that there really are good things out there to do as workers. So over the years, I've developed some relationships in the community, and we founded what's called the Portland Food Project. And so rather than just having the students volunteer at these different places, we've established rounds of grant writing and awards so that the students are actually doing research and activities that support the objectives and goals of those sponsored programs. And in thinking about this, right, grants and grant writing, we already have a plethora of assets, so to speak, in the public space that are ready to be mobilized, but they don't get funded, right? The NSF only awards 7% of their grant applications, and that's a significant amount of labor and research and knowledge creation that just isn't being mobilized because we're not creating those credits and expanding production sets. So, one of the arguments that I make is following the Lakeland Stout, right, which she argues in cultivating conscience is that good laws make good people, and I think the same can be said of money. Good money helps make much better people. And that, like Homo economicus did in the 1970s, money needs to jump the fence. It needs to be taught in every discipline. It impacts all of us in all of our classrooms, whether we're teaching in history or sociology or graphic design. Implementing and creating and mobilizing and finding ways for your students to make an impact in the community and teaching them the basics of the tax circuit and having them actually touch, a currency or a money helps them think through questions of why do we just have $1, right? Why can't we have multiple? Why are we only allowing banks to make these decisions? Why does the decision in order to get money have to turn this money into more money instead of just simply turning it into carbon sequestration or nutritional gain for students? And in doing so, right, if this is something that's being done in multiple classes, then we can coordinate, right, common problem pedagogies and interdisciplinary projects across our campuses and our schools. And one of the interesting facets of this is really faculty ownership of the credit creation process, right? As these circuits become receivable across multiple classrooms, the students do, even in one semester, start transacting and creating their own private economies using these just in a few weeks, right? I asked them explicitly to tell me what they're doing in exchange for the currency other than just paying the tax, just so I can get a sense of inflation or pricing and how it moves through the course of the semester. And you know, they trade all sorts of things, chores around the house and rides to the airport and some illicit substances from time to time. I'd like to be very honest about those. But I think thinking about money as curriculum is a very good way to take ownership of the discussion about reimagining higher ed that are going on, right? The metaversity, I don't think, is anything that any of us are in a big hurry to be a part of. While artificial intelligence and sort of virtual experiences, I think, can be useful teaching tools, I think the future of higher ed needs to be focused on, you know, these impact-related work experiences in the undergraduate space. They really want professional skill development. They want to feel engaged. They want to leave a legacy. They want to do something meaningful while they're in college, and you know, a new form of journalism to report on college campuses about the work that's being done and the relationships that are being built, and thinking through what that means economically and how it engages with these sort of macro abstract ideas of an NIA, for example, right? You know, reading rooms, team pedagogy, production of space, right? All these international studies, right? If we're issuing and we're doing these interventions and we're starting to think through you know, these production systems, not just in our own neighborhoods, but as we study abroad and cultivate the empathy and understanding of problems related to food insecurity, inequality, environmental degradation, all of those things that are unique to many of the spaces we occupy on a daily basis. So if you're interested, here are some of the places where we're writing in this. Scarcity and Social Provisioning, the third edition is coming out hopefully around Christmas. The academe piece is written myself and Scott Ferguson, thinking through a much larger scheme of universities as experimental spaces for public credit creation and chartering of what would be public banks, and how to come at that both from the classroom at a grassroots level and then through legislation like that drafted by Rohan. Care Crisis and Debt was a series of talks that we hosted at Cortland, thinking about the concept of debt from interdisciplinary perspectives. So we have stories from the Black Panther Party and its origins, indebted by proxy, thinking about the impact of family members going to prison, being incarcerated, environmental services and environmental debt, and student debt and a bunch of other things. And then the Food, Money, and Democracy is really talking and thinking about all the different ways worker systems, cooperatives, worker-owned enterprises are a good model for thinking through decision-making and building out this credit creation process beyond just the standard banking space. So hopefully I've at least made you a little bit curious about what issuing a currency in your class would be. Please don't hesitate to email or DM or talk after. I'm more than happy to walk through the logistics of that and how it works. It's the pushback that I get from most people is that I don't know what's going to happen. Right? How much work is this really going to be? And will it work out the way that I envision? And the short answer is it's not. It is going to expose and it's going to do things that you don't expect, which is also part of the learning process of what credit creation looks like for both you and your students. So take a stab at it, start building some relationships with folks in your community, and give students the power to be a part of the money creation process. Thanks.
All right, next up is Yuille from Northeastern Law School. As many people who teach law know, the 1L curriculum is probably the hotbed of kind of ideological discipline and curricular control in the law schools. So thinking about how we can bring money to the first year curriculum in creative ways, I think is a key challenge for people involved in legal education, and Laura is probably one of the most inspirational people on that front in my professional career. So we're very happy to have her on the panel. Thank you.
Okay, are the... What about stand and walk around? Do the Zoom folks have full functionality?
Yeah, we want them to.
I just want them to have full functionality. Okay, so yesterday I was on a Zoom call, because I'm writing, I don't know what I'm writing, whatever, it doesn't matter. I was on a Zoom call trying to figure out what I was writing. And we had a moment, it's about pedagogy, because I wear a lot of hats, and one of them I like to pretend that I know a lot about teaching and education and curriculum, because I'm somewhere on my way to a PhD in that. Somebody else is sitting in here going, but don't you go to UMKC and aren't you in their economics program? Yeah. And aren't you a law professor? Yeah. So anyways, we had this moment where we were like, it is really freaking hard to write about teaching. Like I write, old school I used to teach, I've taught at every level from preschool, obviously to graduate education. And I write lesson plans like a school teacher does. But that's because I'm a black lady and I do interesting things in the classroom, and I have students who lie about what I'm doing. And so now I can give my dean at any time a lesson plan, and I'm like, where did I go wrong? You tell me. So I write them, but then I was trying to like memorialize a particular set of lessons in something, and I was like, it's so freaking hard to write about pedagogy. And I talk about pedagogy, both this like narrow little classroom pedagogy, but also like big, writ large pedagogy, like in my own scholarship. I talk about societal pedagogy, so right, like Lynn Stout's book about how money creates good people, and how good law creates good people, right? That is law serving as a pedagogical function, right? It teaches us what's good, what's right, what's wrong. Anyways, like, oh, freaking frack. It is hard to write it out. On the Zoom call is my sister who has a PhD in education, and she was like, you know why? Right? Because in our field, because I like to put on other hats and people just like indulge me. In our field, right, we define pedagogy, right, as the art and science of teaching and learning, but teaching, right? And she's like, it's the art part that you don't know how to describe. Right? You can get a perfectly written little script for how to do class or whatever, and if the person does it sucks, then it sucks. Right? It's the art part that's hard to describe. Now, I think I'm good at it, but I don't know. I will leave you to judge for yourself. All of that was a preamble to say, put your student hat on, put your experiential hat on, because I'm not going to tell you what I do, because what I do know is that I'm not excellent at writing about it. What I do know is that maybe I'm not committed to writing about it, because I don't know if I'm good at writing about it, but we're going to do a little bit of this. I don't know, I apologize if anybody has ever participated in this. I see a number of familiar faces who may have done this with me before. I do it all the time, but I also do it in my law school class. Now it matters if the Zoom people have full functionality, because all I want you to do is raise your hand if you went to law school and you've taken property. Do we have anybody on Zoom raising their hand? They can just like tell me about how many Zoom people. All right, I'm gonna rely on you law schoolers, like for a tiny, tiny little thing. You went to law school, someone told you why we have property. I'm gonna rely on you to tell me what you learned. So let's start there. No, I don't wanna start there. Before I do that, I'm coming back to you Zoom people who also went to law school. Do you need something from me?
No, I was gonna.
You're just being on. You're ready. You're an enthusiastic participant. Raul Camillo, right there. That's my favorite student. Okay. All right. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. I don't even have my glasses on. I'm gonna put my glasses on because somebody here has their eyes open. Close your eyes. Okay. Oh my gosh, look how pliable we're being. I want you to see it. I don't know what it is. Your most valuable property. The property you care about most. I don't care how you define value. Just gonna throw you value however you want. See it in your mind's eye. Property you care about most. I do this activity all the time, and I'm gonna tell you, I have my eyes closed right now because I'm weird. I never actually think of it. But I actually want you guys to think about it. I don't know what mine is, but that's because I know too much. Right? So you law people who went to law school also put your formal education about property out of your head. All right, does everybody have their most valuable property? I don't care how you define valuable. Right? That's not my task. All right, have it in. Now you have it in your mind's eye. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, write it down. Write it down. All right, some people, you're gonna tell me again. I want you to start. I want you to start typing, just like in short sentences, what your most valuable thing is. What did you identify? Who are you?
My name's Michael.
Michael, what's your most valuable thing? What did you identify?
I was thinking about my car, which I'm trying to sell right now.
Car that you're trying to sell. My most valuable thing. I want to get rid of. Tell me what's your most valuable thing.
I wrote meow.
Meow?
Meow.
Is that the name of an animal?
My cat.
Okay, just maybe it would be hilarious if Pamela's dog was named Meow. Lenore, what's your thing?
My grandmother's amethyst ring.
Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna guess, and if you did this, you don't need to confess. Normally, I have my property students send this to me before the first day of class, right? And I get it, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh, she's amazing," because then I'll show pictures of all their stuff. It's not hard. The internet is a thing. But anyways, I always have somebody. And I always start, when I tell this part of the story, I always say it's somebody. There's always a person who identifies as male, who loves, he thinks he's being so caring because he says his wife. And I'm like, you weren't caring, you just made me want to barf, D-bag. But hey, that's a way to start class. But anyways, I always have that, and then we have to talk about, okay, I said you could identify value however you wanted, but gross. And then you can see that he wants to melt inside, and I'm like, perfect. Goal 1 achieved. Level 1 unlocked. Okay, all right, you guys all have your thing from meow to the family heirlooms to totally fungible. I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's painted with awesome stuff on it. Cars. I don't know, right? Okay, so now we're coming back. We're coming back to our people who went to law school. Why do we have property? Somebody tell me. Ooh, Raul, you had your hand up, and you didn't even know what the question was. Oh, well, anything that you don't have to buy.
I thought you were asking for examples of things we live in poverty.
Yeah. Why did they teach you in property law that we had property? What's the point of property?
There are just a bunch of bundles of rights out there, and you run around and you scoop them up
But what do we need them for? What are we trying to do when we have property?
to shield yourself and exclude others.
Okay. What else did we learn are the reasons that we have property? Preserve wealth. What else did we learn of the reasons we have property?
To look after resources.
To identify who cares about the resources. What else? Anybody else can give us some law school type reasons or even societal reasons? Why do they say we need to have property? Power, right? We got I'm a property theorist, so we talk about property is a way you get freedom. Right? You don't just exclude other people. Property is the place where you get to exclude the state. And so it actualizes freedom. Property is democracy. Why is property democratic? Because if you have property and you don't rely on the state to fulfill your needs, then you vote freely and democracy happens. Right? Right? We say, if you're Jeremy Bentham, property is just the basis of expectations. Right? It's a bundle of things, so you know what to do with them. Right? If we're Locke, we say, but you combined your labor with it. right? And as long as you leave good enough and well enough out there for other people, now you have it. And it shows you that you merit some kind of respect for that labor because you own yourself. I don't know why I think that that's how Locke talks. We can have a whole other conversation. I can't do voices. And so whatever voice comes out, sometimes Locke is a lady. Like, I don't know. It is what it is. I'm gonna get it. Okay. All right. So we know why we have property. All of these are competing reasons for property, right? And the rules that exist out there in the world, right, reflect those reasons. Okay? If you read a case where Native Americans, if you went to law school, you read Judson versus McIntosh, and Native Americans didn't even get brought to the table to have a conversation. But the Supreme Court very happily told us that they suck at owning. And so why would we let them have stuff? All they get to have is some occupancy rights, right? And so when we think that we're trying to assign the protectors, right, land to the protectors, then we use that justification for property, right? And then when we say like property is freedom, right, then we have takings law. And we're like, property is a fundamental right, and so we can't destroy your property. We can't do what Rohan on one occasion suggested, and I tell people about it everywhere. I'm gonna ruin his 10-year prospects because he said, let's abolish property above a certain amount. And I'm like, love it, let's go for it. He's like, that's like a $1 trillion coin, that's not my thing. And I'm like, too bad you said it was public. Right? But when we wanna use certain ideas, when we wanna pursue certain ideas, we use different justifications for property, right? When we learn about trespass in the United States, we've got like nothing. You just have to be on someone's land without permission. For in Scotland, they have no right to roam. And they think that that's a thing. But then there's black people who will, I know this is Scotland, so they're not getting shot. They're getting tackled when they're exercising the right to roam. Right? So we use all of these different reasons, right? So all of them are activated. Everything that everybody says is right about why we have property. Now think of your thing. Pamela, think of your meow. Okay? Lenore, think of your, was there a ring?
Yeah.
It was a beautiful ring. It could be ugly, but I'm gonna go with beautiful. Why would you like, right? What kind of car was it again?
The Chevy Equinox.
Michael, it's not a beautiful Chevy Equinox, right? Like, we all live in an aesthetic world. It is a functional Chevy Equinox. Think of your functional Chevy Equinox, right?
For sale.
For sale. I don't know. I was gonna say the highest bidder. I don't know. Michael might have a reserve price. I don't know. Do you need a Chevy Equinox? Okay. Think of that thing. Okay. And now, with that thing in mind, you don't have to choose my justifications that I listed, because they're not mine, they're the ones that your colleagues here listed. Choose one justification. Choose one justification for all of property. Right? I said they're all right, but that's complicated. That's law hard to do. That's that. Choose one. Choose one. You gotta select it for the property, with your property in mind. It's gonna govern everybody's lenore's So it's governing Lenore's ring. It's governing the Chevy Equinox. It's governing, I'm gonna call your cat Meow Meow now. Can I meet Meow? I'm allergic to cats, so actually I never wanna meet your cat. But can I see Meow Meow from afar? What kind of cat is it?
Orange domestic cat with extra.
I love that answer, because I was like, Pamela is gonna tell me what the cat looks like, or what kind of cat it is, and I'm gonna have no idea, because I know nothing about cats. Okay. David, what was your one reason for property? Oh my gosh, this is like law school. I was like, my hand is up in the air for comfort, I know.
I don't have one.
You don't have one, why not? You're just, we're in a world of freedom, we do whatever we want.
I literally don't have one.
Do you think we should have no property?
Yes.
So we should have no property. So Lenore shouldn't have her mom's, everybody knows. David just said Lenore can't have any power over her grandmother's ring. Meow meow.
That's not what I said.
All right, somebody give me their one rule. What is your one rule to rule them all? Oh, see, got right into the Lord of the Rings. That's another politically complicated question. Why did I get right into the Lord of the Rings? Somebody give me their one rule for real.
To exclude others?
That's the rule you want to go with.
Not really, but.
No, I want you to. No, I want a rule that you guys want. I want a rule that we actually want. In a world where there's property, right? We're figuring out how to distribute property. I want a rule that we actually want.
To allocate governance to people most likely to take the best care of stuff.
Okay. We want to allocate governance to people most likely to take care of the stuff. You have a different rule that you want?
I did, but I want to ask a question.
Go
How do
ahead.
we know who cares for stuff better?
Oh, I don't have thoughts on that.
How do we know? Right? The point. What Rohan is saying is the point should be to allocate the power, the decision-making power, to the folks who are best able to do it. All right, yeah?
Rule against purpose.
We want a justification for property, which says we want to control we want to limit dead hand control, right? But the reason we want it is that no one understands it, and so then what are we going to do? Mike?
Use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. So this is adverse possession, right? Though embedded in adverse possession is also we're allocating power to the folks best able to make make decisions over the property. Okay, I don't care what you chose. Ask yourself this now. Oh, you want to give me one? Give me one.
To serve as collateral to provide liquidity and mobility for people.
Okay, right? This is a different way that we might talk philosophically about property as freedom, right? Because property is giving you access to all sorts of communities, and one space that property gives you access to, right, might be places for further conversion and creation of wealth. Okay, choose what you want. I don't care. I told you to choose one rule. Now ask yourself this question. Normally I'll test my theory, but for time I won't. Look down at your meows, at your equinoxes, at your heirloom rings. Under the one rule that you were like, okay, if we're gonna have one rule, I'll be down with that rule. Do you have property? Do you keep property in the thing that you chose? Lenore's saying yes, right? Under her one rule, of course she's got property in her mom's ring. It doesn't matter if it's, for example, Rohan's rule, which is we assign the power to the people best able to make use of it, right? Because the person who cares most about Lenore's grandma's ring or grandmother's ring is likely to make that best decision. It doesn't matter if we say we're using it to convert it into other resources, right? Because by having property in that thing, right, Lenore can then go and trade it for something else because we've made it fungible. Turns out, and this is why I'm not testing my theory. Turns out, especially with first-year law students or people who aren't in a legal education space, never, ever, ever, that's a lie. One person last week, never, ever, ever until this one person last week, who happened to identify an animal, has ever chosen a property rule to rule them all, a one ring to rule them all, that resulted in them losing property in the thing they identified as most valuable. So this is where I start all of my conversations about property with students, right? You don't have to know anything about property. You don't have to know anything about theories of property. You just have to have lived in a world that has property. And we start there, and we begin to engage, right, the moral outrage, the moral perspectives that are activated by just thinking about who should own and why we own. And then our next step is thinking about how, well, now I'm taking your ring, Lenore, and I'm taking your meow.
He's gonna fight.
And I'm allergic, so I'm definitely not taking your meow, right? And Michael is like, I'm so happy that you're taking my Chevy Equinox because I'm taking all these things from you, and when I take it, I'm giving you money. And I'm crashing your Equinox. And I don't know what kind of ring it is, I hope it's not a diamond, because I'm smashing your ring. Right? I'm not gonna kill a cat because that is a red flag for abusers. So I'm just gonna say, I'm putting your cat in a kennel, right? And when I do that and I hurt your stuff, I give you money. And you're supposed to walk away and say, peace, cool, got it. And we are able to begin the conversation that property does all of this work. And property is so important for all of the values in a so-called Western democratic capitalist economy, socio-legal political system. And somehow then, anything that happens to property can our first impulse be solved by money? And it opens the door to the question, what's money anyways? What's money do? And how do we engage in this thought process of the importance of money? And if money is this important, that it can be a proxy for all of these important jobs, why aren't we thinking more about money? So that's me.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Yuille Ricciardi, one of my students at Willamette Law School, previously a elementary school teacher, as well as Hanna Judson, a PhD student in sociology at Stony Brook. So yeah, I'll hand it off to them now. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here. It's lovely that people take time to come and engage in conversations about how we teach and talk about money and monetary things in intentional ways. You've heard from Ben and Lua about teaching in sort of formal classroom settings, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well, especially from the perspective of how can professors and students collaborate to make classrooms that more successfully engage a broader diversity of students. And then I think Hannah's gonna kind of pick all of this up and talk about how we bring these educational things to people who exist outside of institutional fortresses, out in the real world, as it were. Do this. So I'm going to start a little bit by giving what some call like a positionality statement, talking a little bit about myself and the identities that shape my worldview in particular, and also things that relate to kind of unfairly unearned privilege that I have, and some of the ways that I face, unfair discrimination. So I love my cats, but I'm like having an internal debate about whether I consider them property or not. I'm cis, I'm very queer, I'm polyamorous, I am white, American, speak English, come from a family that's had a lot of access to education and higher education. So I kind of, I'm also disabled, so I kind of have these various vectors, a lot of unearned privilege, and then some areas where I face discrimination. And I think it's important, in part, to acknowledge that in a space like this, but it can also be acknowledged in a footnote in scholarship, because our own experiences in the world and how we have either experienced oppression or contributed to or perpetuated oppression shape how we think, how we talk, how we write, how we engage with ideas, and being authentic about that I think is important. And with that, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the most important teachers in my life. As a white person in this country, most of the most important things I've ever learned I've been taught by particularly Indigenous and Black women and non-binary folks, queer and disabled folks. In particular, I want to thank my educator, Feinig Judson, who has taught me a lot about my role in dismantling anti-Native racism and colonialism. There we go. So I'd like to invite people to take just a moment to reflect. I'm not going to do this as beautifully as Lua did, but just for a minute, think about a formative memory you have about money. And it can be from any time in your life, and I'm not going to make you share anything out loud, so you just think of whatever you want. But a moment where you learned something really fundamental about money, or you had a really bad experience with money, or a really great experience with money, whatever it is, I'll just give you a moment to think about. So if you've thought of a memory like that, now I want you to take a second to reflect on it and figure out, what did you decide because of that experience? Did you decide, wow, like money's easier to come by than I thought, or people don't take me seriously in money conversations, or I'm gonna have to work a lot harder to prove my value in this situation than I thought I was going to have to. Just kind of quick survey of hands. How many people decided something that you would say was kind of like positive about yourself? Like, I'm good with money, or like, that worked out well for me, or I belong here. Like anything that's in that kind of like a positive relationship with money. Interesting. So then, who thought of a memory that was like, I have a negative relationship? Money is hard, I don't have enough of it. Wow, okay, cool. So part of why I wanted to get people thinking about this is that all of us have our own money story, and we carry this with us all the time, whether we're thinking about it explicitly or not. And so when we're talking about educating people about money, and especially if we're talking about trying to undo a lot of the myths and bad education people have gotten about money, it's really important that we think about the fact that everyone is coming to that conversation with their own feelings of whether they belong or not, whether money is something they get to understand or not, how traumatic money has been in their life or not. And this is often wrapped up in a lot of systemic and implicit signals about people's experience of money, right? So especially if you think about the classroom, if you have some class on the course offerings called financial technologies, you're going to have a whole bunch of students who, when they just see the title of that class, are automatically going to say, like, I'm not sure that's a space that I welcome in, or that I can understand or engage with, right? Now that doesn't mean don't offer the class, it doesn't necessarily mean change the name of the class, but like, it means think about what are the signals that you're sending, and if you care about engaging learners, whether that's I care about students coming to my classroom, or I care about people reading my blog, or whatever it is, who are you kind of initially engaging or excluding in how you're framing whatever it is that you're talking about? And up here I have two lovely Amazon employees. They both work at the same company, but like have really different conversations about money and how it works, right? So Jeff Bezos, the infamous, and then Christian Smalls, who put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into organizing thousands of Amazon workers, against a company that was literally putting millions of dollars into their anti-union campaign, and was successful at that, right? And so thinking about what are some of the kind of existing money stories that people have in your classroom or your prospective audience is really important. To talk about some strategies of how we can engage people in monetary education that may see that financial technology class and think I don't belong, or I don't know what this is. I think one of the really important things is for us to really intentionally acknowledge things that are usually left unsaid. So for me, I think I looked at Casey Park's work on this. I think one of the most important aspects of talking about money in this country that's far too often left out of the conversation is how was capital originally generated here, right? And we can certainly talk about enslavement and how that was used as a basis for capital. Casey Park has done a great job of explaining how divesting indigenous people from the land and then collateralizing that land was, one of, if not the main basis for kind of creating the banking industry here and making loans against that stolen land. That loan money was used by colonizers to move farther west and perpetuate that process. And as far as I know, the Wells Fargo that was around then is still the same Wells Fargo that's around today, right? So we can. yeah. I mean, they fixed all of they have a section on their website that says something about Native people, so it's like handled, right? But having authentic conversations about truths that are often ignored or just left off the page, or worse, the things that we tell myths about, like the myth that we tell that this country was founded on equality for all, or what, like that's such a myth, right? Telling the truth about those things helps both people who have experienced generational trauma as well as students who have unearned generational wealth or unearned generational privilege, right? It can be an access point for healing. It can be an access point for students feeling like they're seen or included or thought of in spaces where they're not used to being seen or acknowledged. But for students who haven't ever confronted those truths, it can also be a moment to really reckon with, like, what does money really mean in my life? What does it mean that I'm in college because, you know, the last 3 generations of my family all went to college, used that to accumulate wealth, used that to own homes, used those homes to, you know, have HELOCs or whatever to fund my private school education to get me here, and so on and so forth. It's maybe slightly ironic of me saying that at Harvard Law School, where my dad went to law. No nepotism. Another really important strategy is to see students authentically and meet them where they are. And with this, I think something that's really important is to offer a lot of different ways for students to share about themselves and share their reflections. Some students are never going to want to talk in class, and you know, sometimes you can twist arms and pull it out of them, but if you can offer ways for them to share written reflections privately with you, or post on a classroom wiki, or you know, one of the things that Rohan and I have done, I TA'd a class for him this past year. We started the semester with like a little online form that students could fill out about some of the things that are important to them in their life, right? So going back to what I was saying about money stories, you're not necessarily going to ask them like, what's the most traumatic experience you have with money? But you can ask them some questions about their life and what's important to them to inform some of your thinking about who's in my classroom. I think along with that, it's really important to match your words with your actions, right? So you also have to be sharing and be vulnerable with yourself. And I think, especially if we're thinking about money as a democratic medium, we, you know, part of what I think is maybe the most aspirational aspect of democracy is this sense of community and of sharing, right? And that includes, you know, sharing physical resources, but also the community piece, sharing ourselves and connecting with people. And so if we can be modeling that in our classrooms or in our conversations, we're actually kind of starting to build the world that we're committed to in real time, not just theories about, wouldn't it be great if someday we had, you know, more communal division of conversations, labor, etc. Another big piece of this, I think, is being willing to apologize when you've messed up or caused harm, and be willing to make changes. Like if your students are saying like, I'm sick of reading more things from Jeremy Bentham and other dead white guys, like be willing to change it up, right?
I love Jeremy Bentham. Sorry.
Cool. I mean, there's, you know, a value to all kinds of different theorists. I personally hate John Locke, and every time his name's brought up, I mean, I wrote a very pointed paper about this, but every time his name's brought up, I just wish that people would also say, he talked a lot about freedom, but was invested directly in a slave-owning company and earned profit from that. So, you know, I don't know what he has to say about freedom. It's interesting. This last point is probably kind of obvious, But just take some time to make deliberate choices that are counter to the existing sorry that I'm dying. The existing like oppressive network. I'm gonna have some. So I think one of the things that's really important is, especially if you're at an institution that's like talking all about DEI or like, we want a more diverse bar, we want lawyers that represent, we want economists that represent the communities that they serve. Like we have to be matching that with something, right? It's really a disingenuous conversation if you say we want lawyers to be representing the general public, and then you assign them thousands of pages of words that are written by judges that were all like white men, largely from times where only white men could be in our courtrooms. So make sure that when you're building your syllabus and that type of thing, it's not just like 80 to 90% white men and then we have, a day or two where we offer something from Lua or Kesu Park. How can you build that throughout? I think another big piece is bringing compassion into conversations about money. I think a lot of us wouldn't be here if we didn't care. Thank you. If we, if fundamentally, I think a lot of us are here because fundamentally we think there's some link between money and people's well-being, right? And people being able to flourish in life. And how can we bring that compassion into our teaching? I'll just briefly touch on this. I think one thing Rohan's really great at is teaching skills to help level the playing field, right? So if you have that financial technology class and you're gonna have a bunch of women or a bunch of other students that feel like, I don't belong there, can you do some kind of skill building, webinars or something prior to that class or in that class to say like, it's fine if you don't know any of this. We'll teach you how to read these charts. We'll teach you what CBDC means. Like you don't have to come in knowing that to help level the playing field. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you to Julia, and thank you for the organizers of the conference and this panel for getting everything together and inviting us to be here. My name is Hanna Judson. I am a fourth-year sociology student at SUNY Stony Brook, but that's not why I'm here. I'm actually here in my role as the executive director of the Modern Money Network. Thank you. This is just a little bit about myself. I don't have a positionality statement, however. These are sort of what I've identified as the most important things that you probably need to know about me. I was raised in rural Montana. I'm a massive fan of Taylor Swift. That is a picture of myself and my husband having a religious experience at the Eras Tour a couple weekends ago. I'm a proud union member of the Graduate Student Employees Union on campus, and I'm engaged in organizing for a living wage campaign in that way. And this is a sticker that I saw in the parking lot at school that I thought was phenomenal and just really has the energy that I would like to carry with me throughout life. So I will keep my remarks brief because I know that we want to have some time for discussion and Q&A. Also that's my link tree. I foster cats. If you like cats, that is just like 12 photo albums of my foster kittens that I update regularly. So, if you are interested in that. Who are we at the Modern Money Network? If you're not familiar, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a goal explicitly of promoting the public understanding of money. And what that means in the context of, the socio-political and the legal constructions of money, right? So we're aiming to take this understanding of money outside of the academy, right? We began as a student network that was organized around specific university campuses, But in the past few years, we've been really focused on restructuring and reframing the way that we think about educating people about money, and what that looks like outside of the world of academia, if you will. Why are we doing this? To me, it speaks for itself, and it seems very obvious in conversations that I've had with other academics and that sort of thing. I realize it's not as widespread as I would hope, but why do we talk about money? I think all of my fellow panelists have highlighted this, but understanding your individual role as a money user, it empowers you to understand and navigate these complex social and legal structures of money. As Jakob mentions in the book, it's a direct counter to monetary silencing, right? By engaging or encouraging active participation in the shaping of these economic systems and these economic structures, right? It also, it's helping people recognize the influence of money and monetary policies on themselves and their lives and their communities. So as Julia was talking about, having people actually think about their own experiences with money and reflect on what that means is a useful classroom tool and can be applied more widely, as I note. So what are we actually doing? How are we actually getting this done? Essentially, the structure of the Modern Money Network is a core of a small group of people that manages the sort of national administration of things, all of the resources, the logistics. We are the spreadsheet people, if you will. But primarily, if you are an MMN member, you're engaged in what we call a learning community. So either you are connected with people in your geographic region, in a local learning community, or you're engaged more broadly in a conversation with people around a specific topic area that we call a topical learning community, with the intention of just that, learning. It can be, there's no expectation of any level of knowledge coming in, and we let these communities be as self-directed as they want to be, essentially. We're focused on meeting people where they're at and enabling them to engage in the learning process, whatever that means for them, whatever, however they want to do that. What do you want to learn about? How do you want to learn about it? How can we resource you, essentially, with what we have? And along these lines, we don't impose any particular hierarchy within learning communities. We encourage learning communities to meet together, talk about, what this means for them in their particular community, and decide on if they want to have any kind of internal structure when it comes to these things, or, not, essentially. So, I haven't looked at these slides since I wrote them, so bear with me. What I think is also really important when thinking about teaching and learning about money is also sort of a constant reflexivity, and I think that Julia was touching on this with sort of like thinking about our practices as educators in whatever role that means for you, whether you're talking to high schoolers or undergrads or grad students or anyone else. Thinking about the ways that you're doing that is really important. And so at MMN, our goal is to sort of stay engaged in these dialogues about accessibility, right? Because when you're talking about learning about money, essentially, right, what does that require? And the answer is free time, right? You have to have time to engage in these processes. And what do we know as a sociologist? What do we realize that not everyone has free time, right? It's a resource just like anything else, and it is not equally distributed. So how can we be mindful of that and work on removing barriers, to accessibility, to education about money, functionally. And one thing, our initial step here at MN is to partner with other organizations like Public Money Action and other orgs that are doing sort of the political legwork to get legislation passed to attempt to alleviate some of this strain caused by socioeconomic disparities, right? But obviously that's not the only thing we can do. And I bring this up as like a weird way, like dunking on my own org as a close to my presentation, but as a way of, modeling what this reflexivity looks like, and inviting, suggestions for how we can improve as an organization. And I realize this has been a very brief overview, so if anyone wants to, further discussion is greatly encouraged in whatever format that means for people. But yeah, I think that's everything that I have. I will pass it back off to whoever is next.
Thanks so much.
Are you going
Either way. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Okay, well, I'm just going to be really, so we have time for questions. I want to really quickly maybe go back to the quote that Rohan started with, and I think the core of that quote was, do we love our children enough to not expel them from our world? And I think, the things we're grappling with is we're trying to understand questions of money and monetary design and the possible democratization, which presupposes a kind of movement of knowledge and a kind of knowledge creation that accompanies, bolsters, but also grows out of practices that are more democratic. And I think the classroom practices that people on this panel talked about, that are kind of like the nucleus for more democratic economic practices. And that's, in different ways, always starting from where people are, and then trying to understand how that is maybe determined, shaped by broader institutions, and especially the institutions of money, and trying to help people understand their place in it, and learning as we do so. So that's just really a quick maybe overview from my perspective. I also have questions for the panelists, but what I really want to do is I want to pass the mic on to the audience and see what kinds of questions there are. So if you maybe want to raise your hand.
Thank you for a really inspiring panel. I was just wondering if you could share pushbacks that you get in class, if you get any, because you're all very charismatic, and I can see why people buy into your tools or pedagogy. But do you get pushbacks, and what are they, and how do you deal with them?
I won't go in. I don't know how much Rohan wants to talk about that, but I mean, as a white person that sort of always insists on talking about anti-Native racism in virtually every space I'm in, like, my whole life is getting pushed back, right? Because the existing power structure has no interest in talking about what's really going on, right? And we see that in a lot of different ways. Just as Rohan talks about the $1 trillion coin, and so many people are like, we want to talk about that because then people will know the government has an infinite amount of money and like we would be screwed then. Like, how would we talk about, why we can't give people food or housing if they knew the government had an infinite amount of money? But I think, I don't know, for me at least, that pushback that's just like, why are we talking about this, or how does this relate to law, or why is this important, or our syllabus is already so full, we couldn't possibly talk about other important issues, or any of that. Like, I tend to put it in a couple of categories, right? There are people who give me that pushback and I'm like, you seem like you have at least enough stake in this conversation that I'll have a conversation with you about it, and I'll try and engage, and I'll try and push the needle. A lot of people who have that pushback is just like, you're not gonna win them. They're not the audience. And it sucks if that person has a lot of institutional power over you or something, right? Then you really have to decide, am I gonna fight with my dean over this particular issue or not? But if you're not in that exact position where the person giving you that pushback has like really deliberate authority over you, like sometimes you just gotta move on and say my message is gonna reach the people who are ready to hear it.
So I always tell people the whole thing is the presentation. So if you notice, it may have sounded like a throwaway comment, but I said I write every single one of my lesson plans so that I can put them in front of my dean. And that's because all I get is pushback. But I live in this body. There's 2 whole volumes of a book called Presumed Incompetence. Miradio has a book called Unequal Profession. Education, the field of education is filled with examples, and it didn't matter what I said. And so I have taken the position that since it doesn't matter what I say, I'm gonna say whatever I want. And it doesn't matter what I do, I'm gonna do whatever I want. But the pushback is this is not law. You have an agenda. I'm like, yeah, I do have an agenda. That's liberatory education. If you want to learn and construct knowledge to be a DBAD, that's your lived experience. Great, do that. But I'm creating space so that everyone does. And I have it because I don't like secretly test on my students. But my totally anecdotal experience is that the hierarchies that exist, students who thrive in those hierarchies thrive in my class. But what is really engaging and exciting about the pedagogical choices that I make are that students without voice thrive in my class. And those are the messages that I get. No one ever listened to me. It's not that I listened to them, it's that your class created space where other people had to listen to me. And in the particular educational structures that I work in, there is value and currency in having your vision be validated as a valuable contribution. So like maybe if I was teaching a basic math class, the conversation would look a lot different. The kinds of classes I teach, I predominantly teach in law school and now in business school. Just being told that that's an optional choice is powerful.
I think to also to Lizz's point about people saying that's not law, I mean, on one hand you've got institutional administrators, people who've got a vested interest in the status quo, or for them, you rocking the boat makes their life more difficult and they don't see the upside that you see, so it's just an asymmetric calculus. For a lot of students, I think it's about fear too. You're taking them on an uncharted path, and the fear of the unknown relative to like 20 other professors in the school that are doing the other thing is very scary, and I think partially that's where things like confidence, things like, carrying a big stick, putting a big shadow on the wall is actually important, because what you are projecting to them is that they don't have to take on that fear entirely on their own, that you are actually not only trying to teach them something, but also taking emotional responsibility for the risk that that kind of transgressive education represents. And I think that's why things like taking it up to the bar exam, taking it up to what law means, etc., like the conversation about what these theories of property are, if you do that for 14 weeks, someone's going to say you didn't teach the doctrine and you're going to get in trouble, and like working out where you can push that boundary, where you can't, etc., and then projecting that to the students where they can trust you that the line that you've made is not going to get them in trouble. I think that's actually a big part of this to me, is how do you project winning in a way that isn't a Pied Piper leading people off a pier into the water to drown. And like, that's actually a very scary question to constantly look yourself in the mirror and ask, but I think that's actually the question that comes through the pedagogy as well as the substance of what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I think just to dovetail on something Lua said about like, if people are going to have, undermine you regardless of what you're saying, you might as well say it. And, if people think you have a point, like, well, everyone in education is making some kind of point, right? And we had a student who, is just much more politically conservative than Rohan or I by like a long shot. And at one point in the class, he was like, I just like professors that are neutral, like that are apolitical, right? And it's just like, we had a whole conversation about what does that mean, because you could say that all of the professors that are quote unquote just teaching the doctrine, or the common law professors that are like, let's talk about both the majority opinion and the dissent, and the legal reasoning in both, are like being neutral. But in reality, what they're doing is having a very pointed political viewpoint, saying the existing system is fair enough with maybe just a little bit of reforms needed. So I think sometimes the pushback actually becomes a moment where you can have even more meaningful conversations with people about sort of their assumptions.
Yeah, the pushback question is great because the way that we mobilize the currency is through the tax circuit, and it's always been problematic to me that that's an embedded hierarchy in the system. That how much coercion do you really have to implement in order to mobilize those resources? And so I experiment with different levels of the percentage of the grade in the class, and then the next level of problem that arises is the single mother or people that aren't as able or have the free time and the ability to spend 10, 15 hours volunteering in the community. And so we work through and we think about other ways that I can accommodate and they can still gain the relevant lessons from the opportunity. One of the ways that one of the mothers in the class was able to do it is I just asked her to think about times in which she's sacrificing her time for education in order to care for her family, and I'll credit that as the volunteer hours for the system to think about the importance of care work and the real production of value that's taking place there. And then in terms of getting other, my biggest pushback is from other faculty, like not wanting to do it. Because I'm constantly trying to find partners because I would like to level it up significantly through collaboration and coalition building and data gathering. And one of the questions is, well, if they're earning the currency in your class and they come to my class, can they just pay for the grade without doing the work that I'm setting up? So there's all this sort of property turf war on our pedagogy that occurs there. And the other is, why can't I just have students volunteer and give them a grade for that, for volunteering? And I think that, as simple as the exercise is, and having 3 or 4 paydays through the class where they come up and they receive some funds, or I digitally send it to them on their phone and their wallet, and then them giving it back, that hands-on learning is really a light bulb moment for many of them, especially as we're approaching the deadline for the tax payment. And a bunch of them haven't done any work, and then you've got 3 or 4 that have done 30 times the necessary volunteering in order to pay. It's a good way of thinking about austerity, right? As the state, I could just turn the faucet off today because there's more than enough spending in the economy in order for you guys all to settle your debt. You just have to go work for this guy. And then we vote and think about whether or not we should keep the state open and keep doing the public good, or be responsibly, fiscally sound, and send people to work for each other in the private sector.
Do other students know what money each other has? Is it Bitcoin? I know what the money in the space is, or so if I haven't done anything and now and you've closed the economy, do I just have to go and ask people how much money you got? Can I work for you, or do I know who the fat cats are? Now I call them fat cats. We're volunteering.
So the digital money kind of hid that a little bit. When it's a paper currency, I have all my denominations in front of me, and they bring up their slips to prove that they've done their volunteering, so it's very visible who's getting paid and who's not. So yeah, and some people are coming up every week and they're getting their paydays, and it's funny because I started with all hundreds because of easy denomination, and then so a bunch of my paper money has lines through 100 and rewritten to 50. So the state can easily mark up and mark down and redesign their currency at a whim to meet the needs of its population.
to have a way for them to buy like cool outfits or things to show what consumer.
Of complimentary currency, microtransactions.
Yeah, the gamification. Yeah, and then they share, right? We ask what you've been doing, and they share their experiences, whether it's volunteering for a political campaign, or feeding the hungry at Loaves and Fishes, or going home to give turkeys at Thanksgiving. That conversation starts to open up, and they talk about how much time they spent doing it. So yeah, they definitely have a good sense of who's got the money.
There's someone online.
Oh, okay. Do you want to take a couple?
Totally up to you.
Should we take a couple?
Yeah, just have people ask all questions and then.
Okay, let's take maybe two, maybe the online one first, because I think that person has been on for a while.
And then Michael has his hand up as well, so maybe 3.
Okay, all right.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Hello, it's been great to see the legal experts involved in.
You're muted.
Our computer.
Yeah, down
On the bottom right.
Down in the bottom right corner, volume.
It's been great to see all the legal experts get involved in the drive for monetary reform. And those experts are also getting involved in the Georgia's movement, which wishes to use the law and taxes to make land and therefore housing more affordable. But there's been other issues of addressing inequality today. And I'd like to see the legal profession get involved in the gaping hole in the Constitution, economic rights. Martin Luther King addressed this a long time ago, and he said, what does it profit us if we have the right to enter a restaurant, but we can't afford the food? And before him, and maybe more importantly, President Roosevelt proposed a second Bill of Rights. And that would make the affordable housing and education, a living wage job, healthcare, et cetera, not only a political platform choice, but a legal right. And then we use the legal profession to enforce those rights and really make a big change in inequality. So I wondered if there's been any movement in that direction by the law profession, the academia of law. Thanks very much.
So I guess my question is that went to law school back in the day, and property was basically taught as just this set of very static and permanent rules, and since then being involved in finance and politics, I've kind of realized that even maybe more so than constitutional law, property reflects politics. Perpetuation of wealth and power, and how difficult is it to get law students today to kind of shift from a mentality of teach me the rules in case I want to do real estate closings to getting them to sort of think, how did we get here today? Let's go back 500 years or whatever, and what decisions have been made by courts and by legislative bodies. What did those decisions reflect in terms of politics and wealth and power, and getting people to understand that the rules today are not necessarily permanent, that have been handed down for hundreds of years or so?
Let's take a final question.
Thanks, everybody. The thing I just wanted to pull on a little bit was partially Julia's point about the money stories, and I was thinking about kind of this problem of money and debt being seen as kind of inherently violent or coercive, which Ben was also just kind of getting at, kind of like Graeber's problem, I think, in terms of debt as well, and just thinking about ways to create new money stories that do give that kind of positive vision. I think even beyond the classroom, I was also kind of with the MMN vision, that we think of it maybe in the student groups or the institutional settings, but really like how are we thinking about pedagogy beyond just like the formal classrooms or just giving the homework and then the way to receive it. And I can offer the example I think I was sharing last night about when I was at university, I was working at a food cooperative and we had a food credit system, and that was a way for us to essentially have we have a certain staff level, and then anytime we needed extra capacity, we would look for people to volunteer for food credit, and then they could use it for things in the store. And so it was that's kind of what got me onto all of this as well, right? That system of cooperation and mutual aid was what started putting me onto theories of money, theories of credit. And so it can be obviously within the university system there, but I'm curious ways we would want to, if we do want to expand beyond the boundaries of the formal educational settings to thinking about broader pedagogies. Other examples or textures you want to throw into that? Thanks.
Great. Maybe each of the panelists wants to give a really short answer to maybe not all the questions, so we don't go over time too much. Would that work? Should we just go from right to left?
I think to your question about how to engage law students and understanding kind of how did we get to where we are, what's the sort of ideological underpinning of the hundreds of years of common law we've built up. I mean, I think law students feel a lot of pressure to memorize rules and applications and pass the bar exam and that kind of thing. But I think most of that pressure is coming from the law school industrial complex, right? Like, most of that pressure, I think, is coming from deans who feel pressure to keep up their bar passage rates, to attract more students, and the companies that want to make money off the bar exam. Right now, the bar exam is set to be changing in a few years to incorporate all this stuff that's like more practical skills rather than rules and applications. So there's an opportunity in legal education right now to really reconstruct how we think of it. But I think it's less a question of how hard is it to engage the students in that, and more a question of how do we change the structure and ethos of law school to enable students to come into law school with all of the thinking and feeling skills that they have prior to law school without like beating that out of them in the first semester, because we want to force them to stop thinking about where law comes from and be technocrats of it. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for your question, Michael, about sort of like pulling these, experiences outside of academia and what does it look like to create positive money stories. And I don't have a great example for you right now, only because, we're still working on figuring that out, right? As a group, as an organization. It's a process that we're sort of like actively working towards. And, one of the things that we had originally thought about when sort of redesigning the organization was, do we implement a complementary currency at the nonprofit where we say, in order to be an MMN member, what it means to be an MMN member is that you pay a tax of our complementary currency that you can earn by engaging in sort of like the processes of the nonprofit. And ultimately, we decided to not do that because of sort of these, critiques of, how coercive are you going to be as an institution, and we decided to sort of sidestep that and focus on sort of the learning process and the community building aspect of it, at least at first, right? So, but it is, it's an ongoing conversation, so excited. I'm excited for the future.
So I don't buy into the consumerist approach that we have to most education, particularly higher education. So I don't spend a lot of time, and I have found that it has come back to haunt me when I did spend a lot of time justifying why and how I do things, particularly with the students, at least as a Black woman, particularly a pre-tenured Black woman when I was in that position. Justifying myself suggested to the students that they should be questioning what I was doing. So I do a relatively little. But that being said, I still discuss openly the conflict between my goals and their goals. So my goals are ultimately actually to get to this question about economics rights teaching is for students not to think of themselves as tools, but to think of themselves as creators and producers and reproducers of the law, to think of the law as something that they are actively involved in and not just using. And I let them know that, and I tell them I don't care. I care for myself as an individual, but like I have no dog in the fight of how you choose to be an active agent of legal creation and reproduction. And so that's what I'm getting at, and that's what I'm trying to do. And then I also spend my time reminding them of that, and I tell them, but I know that you might want to just get a grade, or you might just want to pass the bar or do whatever. And then I tell them the things that we're going to do are actually really helpful to get there, and the way I back that up is we do all sorts of interactive activities, and a lot of them are actually like doing law stuff and answering law problems. And the difference between maybe what it looks like in other spaces is that I will elevate, activate, and suggest that the answer that has nothing to do with the black letter law is just as valid if it convinced everybody. And I was like, but don't worry, I'll tell you that that's not actually the valid law. But if you all say, yes, that was a good idea, we say that could be law. That could be a choice. It doesn't happen to be what the black letter law in this jurisdiction says. I can't tell you I get buy-in immediately. I am the professor who always says my teaching evaluations are gonna be terrible. But I get notes 3, 5, 10 years later, which is like I was doing this. And thank you, because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why you were doing it. I thought you were the worst. But it turns out you're the best, and I'm like, I know.
You are the best. I don't have much to say about law curriculum, but I do believe that curriculum is one of the spaces where faculty still have some power. And so it is important that we start reimagining and taking the lead in the crafting of the reimagining of what it is that we're teaching and doing in our classrooms. And this tension between vocational training and, liberal arts education is always there. The way that, when I get pushed back about, why are we reading Keynes or Marx or Smith or, spending time on these really big questions is, I'm not so much interested in training you for jobs that already exist. I want you to create the jobs of the future. The jobs that already exist are boring. Right? There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I mean, if we're truly going to move to an ecologically sustainable, resilient, equitable future, there's no shortage of new and creative things that people need to do to create and build that world. So hopefully we find a lot of positive money stories and that sort of path. I really like, there's a book, Reimagining Money, that's an ethnographic research project in Kenya, where like these groups have done really creative things around like phone minutes to like save family traditions and things like that. So there are some good stories out there.
And I was just saying, this kind of imagining that you're talking about, that's how you get at sort of teaching economic rights, for example, when it's not a part of the traditional curriculum and they're not going to teach that on the bar. We're imagining what we want, and we want as lawyers to be able, or as economists, or as just people in the world, to be able to navigate the world that is and create the world that we want. And so that's why we need to learn all of it, and that's why we do these things.